Hello and welcome to the EMJ GOLD podcast, brought to you by EMJ, your number one open access destination for HCPs and pharma globally. Welcome back, Jade. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. How are you doing as well?
Yes, very good. We're having a lovely winter's summery day, so really can't complain.
Exactly. But can't complain either about today's amazing guest we're going to be listening to.
Certainly not.
Today, we're going to be sitting in on a conversation that I recently had with the amazing Jennifer Schranz, and she is the Senior Vice President and Global Head of Rare Diseases over at Ipsen.
We are indeed. I'm really looking forward to listening to the conversation. But before we do, a little bit more about Jennifer. So Jennifer leads the rare diseases therapeutic area with a focus on R&D, strategy and execution. During her time at the company, she's led some really talented teams of scientists and fostered some really strong collaborations.
Absolutely. And she's been able to use those sort of clinical development expertise she's got behind her to further Ipsen's vision of tackling challenging rare diseases and making a meaningful impact on patients' lives. Really important and noble cause, I think. And that impact is something we touch on a lot during our conversation. In particular, we talk about the double jeopardy that is faced by women with rare diseases, the latest breakthroughs that are exciting her, and so much more.
Very intriguing term, double jeopardy. I'm sure you're going to get into that a lot more in the conversation. So without further ado, should we get into it?
Let's do it.
Hi, Jennifer. How are you doing today?
I'm great. Thank you. How are you?
I'm wonderful, if a bit freezing, as I mentioned. Yeah, it's about 3 degrees this morning over here in London.
An early winter.
Absolutely. Yeah, I had to defrost the car this morning before I came in, but happy to be here and have made it. So the discussion I wanted to have with you today is all around rare diseases and your interest in the space, specifically the double jeopardy that you think faces women in the space too. I know this is something that's a huge passion of yours, so yeah, I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that today. My first question on this: rare diseases present obviously very unique challenges for both patients and HCPs. What do you think are some of the key hurdles that you've seen still prevailing in both the diagnosis and the treatment within this space?
Right. No, that's great. So maybe we can first define what a rare disease is, because not everybody really understands that. So it's defined as a point prevalence of less than 5 per 10,000 people. So roughly in Europe, there's about 30 million people with the rare disease, and worldwide it's about 300. It's important to note that of the approximate 7,000 rare diseases, only 94% actually have a treatment. So that's really critical. And about 70% are a genetic cause, and 70% involve children or pediatric. So what are some of the challenges? Speaking first from a patient-centric view, is it's important to listen to patients because what we understand is that there is often delays in diagnosis. A recent survey done by Eurotas showed that the average time to diagnosis is about 5 years. And the time of when a patient has a symptom and enters the healthcare system versus once in the healthcare system to get a diagnosis, most of the delay is caused by after entering the healthcare system. So it's really critical because patients have so much kind of anxiety and fear, and this also still remains a stigma attached to having a diagnosis of a rare diseases. And so I think certainly as myself in research and development, we're kind of fueled by this passion to try to provide medicines for these patients, as we recently did with a recently approved drug for primary biliary cholangitis.
Yeah, thank you for that. So did you say 70% of rare diseases are affecting children as well? I suppose that really doubles down that fear and anxiety that those people diagnosed with that feel.
Exactly, because you see it's pediatric and a lot of these diseases can be genetic. And so you also are dealing with, a child may be ill and also you have to deal with the family, right? The parents, the siblings. So it's quite complex. I think what's really, important to understand is that this diagnostic odyssey, which means that it takes a long time to get a diagnosis with potential misdiagnosis or, inappropriate treatment, really can prevent appropriate treatment, and that can actually delay the patient getting the care they need. And so it's really critical that it's one of the challenges to focus on early diagnosis, as well as education and training for rare diseases, not just for physicians, but for the communities and for people to be more aware of what a collection of symptoms could mean. So I think we've made great progress, great strides. I'm extremely optimistic about the future, I just think we need to keep our eye on the ball and continue to try to shorten the diagnostic odyssey for patients, as well as be able to provide medicines that will, hopefully have patients, live a healthier life.
Yeah, definitely. Super important. Speaking of providing those medicines, do these challenges affect the overall drug development process as well when it comes to rare diseases?
Yeah, so as you can imagine, there are treatment guidelines, and there's kind of guidelines for how you do a clinical study to get approval for common diseases. So everything is a little bit more challenging, which is why those in the field of rare diseases are really passionate and resilient, and find purpose in coming to work every day, essentially. And so you'll see, because it's a rare disease, you have smaller patient populations, and the patients may be not all exactly the same. We say the phenotypes are slightly different. So when you do clinical studies, you have to have multiple sites, multiple geographies, and you may be looking at some of the clinical study sites that may not have actually experience in clinical research. And you also have to think about the patient. The patient always has to be first. We have to listen to the patient. And for some studies and some diseases, patients don't have mobility. So you need to figure out how to get a patient from where they live to the center of excellence or the study site where you can, involve them in the clinical trial, because that may be their hope for potentially a better future. And you often need to make special arrangements. Some disorders have disabilities with the fact that they can't lie flat, or they can't sit properly. And so when you're thinking of the disease and their symptoms, you really have to think of the patient, and then within the kind of the research ecosystem, how are you going to adequately, one, address their symptoms, as well as how they can then participate in the clinical trial. So it really requires a lot of forethought, a lot of involvement in patient organizations. Before we even start the study, we need to speak with them and find out how they feel and they function, what really bothers them, and then try to ensure that we work on studies where we can ensure, one, their symptoms and their disease progression is decreased, but also at the same time we have to ensure that we can get regulatory approval. So it's really a balancing act of managing symptom management as well, where our research strategies to focus on preventing disease progression. So really having disease modification where we can impact the course of the disease. And that's what we've done recently with the recent approval of a new medicine for a disease affecting women called primary biliary cholangitis.
Mm. Yeah, wow, I hadn't really considered that before. Those multiple geographies that you have to factor in. It can be hard enough engaging displaced patient populations when it comes to the usual clinical trials. But yeah, if they have these mobility issues as well that make it even harder for them to specifically get to trial sites, that's just another layer of
Exactly. And you think about if, children are being involved in the clinical studies, the parents need to be there with them. And there's also siblings. You also have to think of the whole family unit when you're doing clinical trials. And also, if, for example, in primary biliary cholangitis, predominantly a disease affecting women, women are caregivers. They may be working, they may have children. So you have to think about, well, they also have to leave their regular life to go into a clinical trial, which clearly they understand is important. And what I've seen in the rare disease community, that patients are passionate and want to improve the lives for themselves if they can, but the level of sacrifice that they have also for people with the disease that may follow them is quite incredible. So they want to make a difference with their lives, and they view this as an opportunity that they can help others be healthier, even though the cure may be not in their lifetime, but they're hoping what they do can contribute to others. So it is really really rewarding to work in this type of work.
I can imagine. Yeah, that's really inspiring to hear. So you've mentioned this recent approval around primary biliary cholangitis. Do you have any other examples of recent innovations or breakthroughs, and can you explain a little bit more about this recent approval?
Right. So primary biliary cholangitis is a rare cholestatic autoimmune liver disease, and it affects 8 to 9 women for every man that's affected. And that's probably because of the autoimmune component. And for really the last 10 years, there's been no approved treatment for second-line therapy. And what's important, and this perhaps also speaks to some of the gender inequalities, is that a lot of the times the symptoms of the disease are very nonspecific. Women may have fatigue, they may have brain fog, And this is at the time of their life when the average age is, between 35 to 55, that range of when they may get diagnosed. And they have liver disease with this that is slowly progressive and often silent. So they don't know that they have this disease. And these symptoms may be, people may say, well, is this because you're, menopausal, or you're, raising children and you're working, you're stressed. So a lot of the times, what the patients are feeling may be not understood as an important part of a symptom complex that could lead to a diagnosis. And if they were aware of that diagnosis, we talked earlier about misdiagnosis, or no diagnosis, you may be able to intervene and prevent that disease progression. So, it's really important to be aware of the symptom complex for primary biliary cholangitis with liver tests, as well as listening to the patient. And we're, very pleased that we were able to bring a new medicine. It's really a first in class during the last 10 years, where we hope that we will be able to help improve the symptoms of primary biliary cholangitis for the patient, at the same time preventing disease progression. So a conditional approval occurred in Europe in September, and in the US during the summer. So we're really pretty excited that any new treatment for rare diseases really engenders a lot of excitement in the rare disease community. And now there's, hope for these patients that, hopefully this will make their liver disease better. And so we're quite excited that we can do this for the Rare Liver Network.
Yeah, it's a super exciting time in the space, I think. Do you have any sort of education initiatives around that, where you said, obviously it affects women in the same range of menopause? Do you have sort of techniques that you're employing to really educate HCPs on how to catch these intricacies of the rare disease?
Yeah, I think one example is what you're doing right now. This podcast is really important. So if people can listen to this podcast and be aware of rare liver diseases and gender disparities, I think once a new treatment is approved, you'll see that the prevalence of the disease often increases because patients are excited. They hear about it in their patient network. Often at our scientific congresses where physicians attend and other healthcare providers, patient organizations also attend. And so what we're seeing more at some of these conferences is that we often have patients on a panel to share their voice, to tell their stories, which are extremely powerful. And so that's one thing I think that healthcare providers need to listen to the patient and hear their stories and how it's impacted their quality of life. So that's really important. And we also spend a lot of time on scientific exchange with physicians. So at congresses, we provide material on understanding the symptoms, how to help diagnose this disease earlier. What are the warning signs? How do you talk to patients? How do you ask questions? I think that's really critical. And now that there's a approved medicine that can help treat, you'll find that physicians are really thirsty and hungry for knowledge, because they can offer patients a potential treatment option. So it really goes to collaboration with healthcare providers, collaboration with the patient organizations, and also the partnership with pharma, I think is really critical. And when you have close alignment on the goals, which obviously is to help patients have a better life, it's really a win-win situation for everybody.
Yeah, it sounds like a really powerful three-pronged approach there. Hopefully we see some change in the space after all this. Yeah. So we've touched on a lot during this, the sort of recognition of knowledge gaps when it comes to women's health conditions. What do you think are some of the most concerning gaps that you've observed in the understanding of rare diseases in women? And how do you think these gaps impact the treatment outcomes within the space?
Right. So I talked earlier about that survey done by Eurotas. I think it was over 13,000 people with multiple rare diseases answered this survey. And what was seen was the time to diagnosis, the delay. The average time was about 4.7 years. And when you look at women with rare diseases, when you also, manage the prevalence, potential differences between different diseases, you still see that women are diagnosed later than men, and that they may not even receive the same treatment. And this is seen in common diseases as well. It's a very big literature in cardiovascular disease that women are diagnosed later and they're not receiving the same treatment. So this is all amplified in rare diseases. And in this similar survey, for example, in France, they also looked at the diagnostic journey for 22 different rare diseases. And they saw for 22 different rare diseases, regardless of whether they were more involving women or men, that the delay for diagnosis was seen in a very prominent. So why is this? Is that because women are less likely to share their voice and to share their symptoms? Are they trying to say, I have fatigue, I have brain fog, for example, for primary biliary cholangitis, and those symptoms aren't taken seriously? Or are they too busy with life, thinking that maybe it's just their hormones, for example, pregnancy, menopause, hormones fluctuation also impacts, the immune system, et cetera. So I think it leads to frustration, distrust of a lot of women with the healthcare system if they feel they're not being heard. So I think what's really important is also to think, our kind of women program to not be empowered or to push for their voice to be heard and to say, no, there's something truly wrong with me. These symptoms are important. It's more than just being tired. And so I think hopefully with these treatments and talking to women and having support groups and women being able to share their stories, women become empowered and more able to, really share their voice and help, the younger generations as well to do that. So I think it's just something that's systemic and has been hopefully changing. I think it will over time as everything. Sometimes you need a bit of tincture of time to improve. But if we continue to have this discourse, this dialogue, I think that eventually we'll be able to narrow the gap between this gender inequality with common diseases. And certainly that's all amplified in rare diseases. So it's really quite critical.
Yeah, definitely critical. Gosh, and then no matter where you are, I think in the world, there's always a gender disparity.
Yeah.
So it's a shame it's happening so prevalently in the rare diseases space.
Yeah, no, it's unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. So from your perspective, what do you think needs to change when it comes to this? Is it to do with research, clinical practice, or healthcare policy that will really improve outcomes for patients with rare diseases? I feel like I'm going to know your answer here from our discussion.
Right. So it's a very complex, that could be an entire, a workshop. I think it's really multi-pronged because it has to do with healthcare systems. It has to do with health economics, has to do with policy, has to do with the focus on, health is essentially wealth, right? It's really critical that we have a healthy community because then people can be productive and work, et cetera. So I think that's really critical. As you know, I think the importance is that of the 7,000 rare diseases, 94% of them do not have a treatment. So I think there has to be investment in innovation for rare diseases. I think that's really critical. And without that investment, there will be no new medicines, right? And so I think that's one part of it. Second is incentives. Before, in Europe, there were no incentives for pharmaceutical companies to do innovative research to bring new medicines to market. And once incentives were put in place related to regulatory data protection, for example, you saw that there was huge interest in developing new medicines. And so patients benefit with this research and development. So I think innovation, investment is critical. There has to be really a predictable and robust policy environment where we can have discussions on how to ensure that we deliver medicines to patients. There's fast innovation. There's access to drugs. There's no drug shortages, and I think the policies have to be aligned such that one, understanding clearly that the only way we support innovation and incentives, that's the only way we're going to continue to have new drugs being brought to patients. And so that's something that I think has to be heard clearly, because if not, then, one, patients will not get the medicines really they deserve as a right to treat their health. And secondly, which I think really critical, is that Europe wants to remain competitive in the innovation space. I mean, Europe wants to be considered a hub for innovation, for, clinical research, for example. And that's really critical. And without appropriate investment and incentives, I think that, may decrease. So those are some of the, things that I think are really important to stress that people be aware of.
Yeah, for sure. There's so many different stakeholders that need to have their hands in the pot, I think, for this to really go forward and for us to actually close the gap for rare diseases. Sorry, I feel like this is such a standard podcast question, but what first inspired you to get into rare diseases in the first place? Was there like a pivotal moment that you thought, this is something that I really want to do?
Yeah. Well, I think it starts with apparently since the age of 3, I wanted to be a physician. So I kind of geared my entire life to becoming a doctor and to help people. So It sounds a little cliche, but really I've kind of lived my life that way to help. And my training, I'm an infectious disease physician, and I did a lot of my training and was part of the AIDS epidemic when that happened. So I was taking care of patients with AIDS, which in itself was a vulnerable, stigmatized population. And look how far we've gone with being able to make it into a chronic disease. So halfway through my career, I started. I went from infectious diseases to rare diseases, and it literally ignited like a fire in me, because one, you feel so connected to the patient population. You actually meet patients who you can talk to and hear their stories. And so that, kind of fosters my really purpose in life, is to wake up every day and realize what I do, working with people within my team who are all passionate and resilient. And, you have to be creative, you have to be innovative. And you have to put in front of us every day the patient, knowing that if this was your mother, if this is your sister with primary biliary cholangitis, if this was yourself, you would really want a treatment. And so I think that really is why being in rare diseases is super exciting for me. And I'm just really honored to, as I say to my kids, I'm really honored to be able to say that I left, the world in a better place. I felt like I was able to contribute to helping people feel better and stay healthier.
Amazing. I can tell you're an incredibly empathic person. I think that's such an important quality to have, not only working in the rare disease space, but I think in the pharmaceutical industry in general, and really driving forward change for patients. Having that at the heart of what you're doing, I think that's a really key facet to have.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with that. And I think, patients and organizations, pick that up, that you really try to want to help them, and that collaboration or partnership is really critical for success. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate certainly your broadcasting rare diseases, the importance of rare diseases, as well as also highlighting, the gender disparities with women. I think it's really, critical at this time in the world to focus on female women's health. And the importance women have to, the economy and to raising families in the community.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the discussion today. It's been amazing to chat with you.
I've had a great time myself. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I completely agree with you, Jade. I think Jennifer's empathetic nature really shone through throughout that episode. Do you have a particular highlight from your discussion?
Oh, absolutely. I really loved hearing her talk about the importance of simply sharing information around gender disparities in rare diseases. I think it was really interesting to hear that raising awareness can sometimes lead to an increase in disease prevalence, but obviously for the right reasons, because patients are able to get diagnosed and understand what they might be experiencing. So all in all, it's a benefit.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I found that bit really interesting as well. I also really like what she was saying about the benefits of patients speaking on panels at congresses and how that can help healthcare professionals to become more aware of some of the more unnoticed or rarer symptoms of rare diseases. I thought that was really interesting. And then also what she was saying about how important it is for the industry to show empathy to patients, not treat them like test subjects in a study or a trial, but as real people. I think that is what really matters.
Absolutely agree with you there. But sadly, that is all we have time for today. Thank you again to Jennifer for coming onto the show, and thank you all for listening.
As ever, and be sure to tune in next week where we have another great discussion from another insightful industry leader coming up. But until then, it's bye from us.
See you next time.
Bye.